Nation in Conversation, proudly brought to you by Afgreen, Fort Knox, Hinterland, Monsanto, Nedbank, NWK and Sendes. The only way that we can live is if we grow. The only way that we can grow is if we change. The only way that we can change is if we learn. The only way we can learn is if we are exposed. And the only way that we can become exposed is to throw ourselves out into the open. Do it. Throw yourself.
Good day and welcome to Nation in Conversation with me, Theo Foster. We close off this series with a broad discussion on the agricultural sector, the past, the present, what has changed and what the future holds. You can join us on Twitter @NationConverse or visit the website nationinconversation.co.za. Joining me in the studio today is Chris Burgess, the Editor-in-Chief of Landbou Weekblad, and François Strydom, Managing Director of Sendes. Hello, gentlemen. François, let's wind the clock back 25 years. The agriculture sector, 25 years. What was the lay of the land?
I think vastly different. 25 years doesn't seem like a long time ago, but 25 years ago, we were in a highly regulated environment. Single-channel marketing. Prices weren't discovered as they are today in the South African context internationally. Soft commodity prices are discovered internationally. They were announced. The Minister of Agriculture got up one morning and he announced the maize price for the next year. And that was it. You could do nothing about it. So you can think that the whole production cycle from a farmer, he was focused on production. Today, it's vastly different. He has to think about marketing. He has to think about international markets, competitiveness, and. So I think that was the big difference. Much smaller production units. I imagine, and I don't have the correct figures, but in the vicinity of 60 to 65,000 farmers. Today, 30,000 farmers. So vastly different, highly organized, and a free market that is now in play.
We were a closed economy. We had regulation. Farmers were protected. International markets has less of an impact. We even had the government supporting the farming industry with a whole structure of subsidies and protection. As a person that has reported on the sector, that has looked at these changes, that have reported on where these changes were and what changed, if you look back 25 years ago and you look today, what is the major changes from your perspective in the sector?
Well, obviously the agricultural market was opened up. So farmers just had to become more entrepreneurial. And I mean, there was a big shakeout. Farmers had to be efficient. They had to increase their efficiencies. And I reckon through that shakeout, I think South African farmers today, being in sort of an environment where they, I think, are the least protected in the world, I think we undoubtedly have of the most efficient and best farmers in the world. I mean, I think the big issue is the efficiencies that had to be increased because of a free unregulated market. So I suppose the biggest efficiency that came in was the introduction of GMO maize, which was really a revolutionary advent in the agricultural sector. We suddenly could produce more maize on less farmland and with less inputs, with less herbicides and other poisons. And then I think that you know, that drilling down on the efficiencies over the years has just been phenomenal. You know, where today we have what we refer to as precision farming. You know, in cropping, from cropping to livestock production. You know, where every input that gets used, from fertilizer to water, gets measured and gets checked and double checked. You know, so farmers now have basically cut out all wastage on the input side. And then what has also been interesting, you know, is that what I've seen is the focus on natural systems and on the natural services that, for instance, healthy soil gives you. You know, I mean, the example that I always think of is the Chinese. I mean, they've discovered how expensive it is when you don't have bees and you have to hand pollinate your fruit trees. You know, so there's been a huge shift in farmers trying to understand, for instance, soils. You know, and the value that a healthy soil gives you. You know, and the service, the free service that a healthy soil gives you. Now, for instance, if you've got your soil life in balance, for instance, fungal growth, you know, how that sort of extends the reach of your plant's roots, you know, conservation tillage, everything from no-till to no-till. Well, I suppose we don't really do no-till in this country, but conservation tillage, keeping the soil covered, making sure that you have your moisture retention. So basically, I think that what deregulation did was, I mean, it's just made farmers extraordinarily efficient, from the primary level all the way down the supply chain. You know, so I really think that we have one of the most efficient farming sectors in the world.
Francois, you as an agriculture company sits in the middle of this value chain, and you manage a large portion of this value chain. Obviously, these changes also put the responsibility and pressure on you to keep with the times, to also change. How did you have to change your business model to adapt to these?
In short, Theo, you can describe it as bigger, better, faster. You know, if you look at the value chain, lesser farmers, and you look at the other side of it, the 55 million consumers who knows they know what is good and what is not good. They know pricing levels. They understand nutrition. They understand the life cycle of the product. So everybody in between, from the producer to the consumer, had to reshape, reorganize themselves. And I think that was sort of the biggest challenge. You talk about 25 years ago, where we were sort of a closed economy. So from a business point of view, all of a sudden you were thrown into that international atmosphere where you benchmark not against the guy next to you, but the guy in another country. And of course, you saw a whole lot of multinationals entering our market, and specifically the food value chain. Almost all the multinational players are present in South Africa. So you had to up your game to that standard. Chris has just referred to the competitiveness of the South African farmer, and him, because of the lack of support from government, and I mean financial support, he had to be cutting edge. So, you know, he demanded somebody to do business with that was at that same level. So, you know, you had to up your game in every aspect. If you look at all the disciplines within a normal business, from HR to IT, you know, right through the spectrum, you had to up your game.
After the break, I want to come back to specifically that upping the game and how the farmer today is different than the farmer of a few years ago. We'll be back right after the break. Welcome back to Nation in Conversation. Chris, before the break, we talked about how the environment has changed, but the farmer, the knowledge of the farmer, the way of doing business, the attributes of a farmer has also changed, as well as the structure of farming. What have you noticed in terms of those changes?
Well, I suppose one of the biggest changes is the way that family farms have have tried to adapt to what Francois was referring to as bigger, better, faster. You know, so I mean, an interesting example would be, for instance, a group of farmers in the Overberg. You know, they all had reasonably small units, farming units, and they made quite a leap of faith and started farming in partnership to try and get the economy of scale going, which they managed to do. And it's these three guys that farm in partnership. And what they did is they each one has taken one of the diversification branches. So the one guy does the cropping, the one guy does the dairy, and the other guy does the livestock, which sort of ends up not only giving them the economy of scale, but also gives them sort of a sharpened management focus. Because as opposed to one farmer doing cropping and livestock, the one guy now just focuses on the cropping and really sort of applies his mind to that. So it's quite interesting to see how farmers adapt to the reality. You know, the reality of economy of scale, for instance. You know, South African farmers are hugely resourceful when it comes to that. You know, making plans and adapting. And then, of course, I mean, farmers have just become, you know, they've just. I think the knowledge economy drives agriculture. So farmers are continually absorbing information as much as they possibly can to try and get that competitive advantage. As Francois said, not necessarily on their neighbours, but on their competitors in Australia or Chile or Argentine. So a vastly more focused and more efficient farmer. And you know, some farmers, you know, there is this argument that you know, you need the economy of scale, and the mega farmers are the ones that are going to survive. But I mean, I know smaller farmers, you know, that I think farm far more efficiently than some of the bigger guys, you know. So it's a difficult, you know, it's a difficult question to answer, because you've always got your exceptions to the rule. Bottom line is, I think South African farmers have a huge capacity to adapt.
Francois, Chris talked about the knowledge-based economy. That farmer is your client. And obviously, him being informed, international experience, a lot of times studied overseas, looking at overseas way of doing things, you have to service him. And he's expecting of you a service that is on par with what his knowledge is, on the one hand. But I can add to that, in terms of international companies entering the South African markets, they compete to the areas where they believe they can compete. And that means that there's a risk in terms of positioning your business. How do you make sure your business can adhere to these pressure points?
There are two very important factors that you lifted out there, Theo. Maybe let's start with the one. I think knowledge today, the consumer wants solutions. They can buy the product almost anywhere, not only locally. They can source it internationally through internet or whatever. But what they cannot source is a solution-based product that comes with a solution that helps him in his specific farming sector or his business sector. And I think that's where we focus on. So immediately, if you require your staff to be and to act differently, you need to equip them. And how do you equip them? You equip them through international exposure. Show them what people in the same area do in other areas of the world. So, I mean, I expose my people to the best universities in the world, Harvard, INSEAD, Stanford, so that they meet and rub shoulders with other role players. If you just look at one aspect of our business, the provision of inputs, the retail sector. If you look at other competing sectors, the FMCG sector is sort of the leader in that area. And if you want to, in the hardware retail section, be world class, you have to adapt to the speed and the agility and the ability to provide solutions, the same as they do in that area. So, you know, in all aspects, but it normally starts, like any other business, it starts with people. The better, more equipped, more passionate and involved staff you have, the better chance you have to compete. I think the second aspect that you referred to, the multinationals entering our market, our business model, it goes through value input of requisites, and as well as the market access aspect. So the multinational will decide on which part of that business he will attack you, in what region and where, and they have that flexibility to come in not with that total solution, because you were an established business in a specific market, and your client, sort of expects you to react through that whole sort of value chain. So, to do that, you have to be good not only in one area, but in each single area. So again, comes back to staff and equipment.
No, I just wanted to add what is. When you talk about the information economy, I think that's also the direction that farming is going to go. Is moving in. Specifically with precision farming, where everything gets measured. I think that the future of agriculture lies in big data, and who's going to own that big data. So I mean the data that gets generated on a ordinary maize farm in the Eastern Free State is quite phenomenal, because everything gets measured. So, and that data can be used for all sorts of applications, and I think that's basically the direction that agriculture will go into. And the big fight will be who will own that data. Will the farmer own it, or will Francois own it? And how is it going to be? How is it going to be applied?
We'll pick up on that right after the break. Welcome back to Nation in Conversation. Francois, before the break, we talked about precision farming and big data. And the question was asked, the fact that that is the future where decisions will be made, but who owns that data? Yeah. What is your view?
Interesting point that Chris picked up, and he asked the question, who owns the data? We or the farmer? And I think not one of us. I think if you talk in mechanical or mechanized terms, John Deere owns it. It's almost the same as when you have a phone. You own the phone, but the software gets updated by the provider. It's his intellect. So I think the same sort of scenario is developing. You own certain equipment. I provide the equipment to you, but the real owner of the software, that's another question. And I think there's a lot of debates that's going to evolve, around that. I think there's no question about the data, your own production data, the farmer's own production data, that is his. And I think everybody acknowledges it. But to turn data into intellect, into usable, that's the big issue. That's where solutions comes from. And that's where the farmer, Chris spoke about it, where he gets his edge from.
If we say that the future lies in technology, in the broader sense, if it's GMO technology, if it's the usage of big data, if it's hardware equipment technology, from an agriculture company, what's a challenge that's placed on you looking 5 or 10 years ahead?
Yeah, I think we have to realize that we are sort of an intermediary between the farmer. We provide equipment, we provide inputs that's not manufactured or owned by ourselves. So, that's where the solution comes in. You have to then, with intellect, give that through so that the farmer, sort of gets that solution-driven input and not merely a piece of equipment. The issue today is time for the farmer. He has absolutely limited time if you talk about scale. So he needs, input through that solution-based provision so that he can leverage his own time and his ability and his capacity and capabilities. And that's where service providers and input providers like ourselves needs to play. in that space.
Chris, you talked about big data and precision farming. If you were to look 5, 10 or 15 years into the future, how do you believe the landscape will differ then from what we're seeing now?
Well, what I find quite interesting is, I mean, one talks about technology, and you think, and I mean, the technology has been, I mean, with the introduction of GPS, and I mean, it's been phenomenal, and the precision with which farmers can farm is phenomenal. But what I find interesting is that there's almost a reverting back to the way our grandfathers farmed, in the sense that farmers have to be a lot more aware of the biological systems that they're farming with. So, for instance, you know, the understanding of soil. I mean, we are actually only scratching the surface at this point. So I think that the harnessing of biological systems and the way that is going to cut down on the cost of farming and is going to impact on the potential pollution or the potential environmental impact that farming has, which obviously is a big consumer concern. I find that quite interesting. Is that there's a, you know, technology will take you so far, but you still, you know, that still needs to be supported by a real thorough understanding of the biological systems and how that sort of drives agriculture and production.
The big challenge, Francois, looking forward is that we've got a population that's urbanizing at a rate, it will be a bigger percentage of the population. We've got the world population growing, which means that the principle of food security, of making sure that there's enough production for all the people in the world, will become more and more important, and that goes directly back to the efficiency point that Chris made. If you look ahead, are the agriculture value chain currently positioned correctly to be able to supply into that additional demand?
Yeah, I think so, Theo, and maybe we should not only talk about technology, but more to innovation. So innovation, I think, you know, encompasses a lot of things. It's an interesting thing, again, that Chris referred to, so sort of going back to the biological ways, because that's sustainable and it's always the cheapest. If you look back in sort of the eras that we came through, the industrialization, then the information, and now it's sort of the era of the consumer. I think that your next era where we're moving into is that biological era. That's if we understand biological processes, thoroughly understand it. And Chris said we merely scratch the surface. That's true. You know, think of cultivar development. 10 years ago, it merely took 10 years to develop a cultivar. Now that can be done in 3 years. And the technology is already there to do it in a year. But it's still the basic biological process that you follow. It's the understanding of, say, for instance, the genome structure that unlocked that. So it's again, you know, we're almost back to that point of, if we look at the narrow field but much deeper, more intense, you deep dive into a specific subject, then you understand, you know, the real biological processes that takes place at the back of that. And if you can understand that, you can turn up the speed on that. You can fast forward that, which is really what GMO does. It's a basic biological system, just in fast forward mode. But it is as basic and biological as the original process were.
Agriculture company in the future, what will be your major challenges to survive?
Yeah, I think, again, staff, it always boils down to the ability of the staff to understand, to be passionate, to understand your client base, to service them, to almost get into their shoes and provide the solutions that they want. I think that will be universal. It will always stay that.
We talked, Chris, about the farming entity changing, the family farm, the structure of the farm, specialization, technology, knowledge base, different ways of farming. The these required skills of a farmer looking forward, what would be the elements that's needed to survive in the landscape as it's changing?
I think it's similar to any business. I think that you often it's said that farmers have to be everything from soil scientists to human resources managers. But the more you speak to farmers and the successful farmers, the more you realize that they have surrounded themselves with really, really competent and skilled people. So you find that in the competitive environment in which South African farmers operate, there is so little room for error that you can't afford to make that one critical production mistake. So you find that farmers are increasingly surrounding themselves with highly skilled people. So in a way, a farmer almost becomes a manager on his own farm with strategic inputs from outside. So it's a far cry from the days where the farmer was boss of the plaas, and he made all the calls. I think that the really successful farmers realize that you need those critical inputs, and you need the best possible advice that you can get.
Thank you very much. Farmers and agricultural companies will have to be professional to compete against the rest of the world. You can follow the conversation. Follow us on Twitter @NationConverse or visit the website nationinconversation.co.za. From me, Theo Foster, goodbye.
Nation in Conversation, proudly brought to you by AFGRI, Fort Knox, Hinterland, Monsanto, Nedbank, NWK and Sendex.
The world is changing today. The world is changing in every way. Let's stand together, put our hands together, join hands forever. We're making it better. No matter where you are, you could be near or far away. We're singing together, we're dancing together, we're changing